Here I am again. 6 months have gone by, and another 6 months of reading to rank. And let's just go ahead and get into it. If you've been here before, you know what these tiers mean, and if you haven't, hopefully they're self-explanatory. The one addition that I have here is nonfiction. I've read enough nonfiction in the first 6 months of the year that I felt like it justified its own tier. And plus, to sound like a broken record of what other people say, it feels weird rating nonfiction, even though I do actually rate it as a star rating on Instagram. But regardless, I'm not going to tier rank them for this video. So let's go ahead and get started. The first book of the year that I read was a reread, and that was Children of Dune by Frank Herbert. It had been, 22 years since I had first and last read Children of Dune. So I was honestly a little nervous going into it. Would I still like it? Would I enjoy it? Would I get the same thing out of it? I was certain I wasn't going to get the same thing out of it. And I was blown away with how much I loved it. I think Dune Messiah is still my favorite, but I actually think I like Children of Dune more than Dune. So I'm like slowly ranking these as I reread them against each other, the series. So yeah, I really, really liked Children of Dune. It was great. Everyone should read it. So everyone should read the Dune series. So I reread that. The next book that I read was The Pearl by John Steinbeck. I had read Of Mice and Men and The Red Pony late in 2023, and I bullied Carlos into buddy reading John Steinbeck with me, so I had to catch up to him, and he had already read The Pearl. I'm pretty sure he had already read The Pearl. I think that was one of the ones. Either way, I was so engrossed in the story. John Steinbeck's prose is justifiably classic in the canon of American literature. And his storytelling is very simple, but complex at the same time. I don't know how to adequately describe experiencing his storytelling. But The Pearl is about the titular Pearl, and about a family that finds this pearl and its ability, and the family's ability to, or desire to, aspire and get out of their situation. And then it's everyone around them seeing this pearl and yearning after it, and greed, the sense of greed and power that comes with seeing the pearl, having the pearl. And it is a heartbreaking story. It is so intricately plotted, and the themes are woven throughout this short novel, and it is wonderful. I will actually link down below, along with Carlos's channel, StoryTube. We did a chat about all the John Steinbeck that we have read up through The Grapes of Wrath, spoiler alert. So I'll go ahead and actually link that down below, and I won't ramble, hopefully, nearly as much about these John Steinbeck books that I read. I'll just rank them. So, with that said, The Pearl. I would say it is at the top rank. Well, I mean, of course it's at the top rank of new favorite right now, because it's the only thing in that tier. But yeah, it's definitely a new favorite. Not quite mind-blowing for me. But it's on the edge there, I think. The next book that I read was Dreams of Steel. I can't even remember what book this is, in the Black Company series by Glenn Cook. And I really, really liked this one. There were some things that were very frustrating about it. Hold on, let me look at my review to make sure, because I read the Glenn Cook Black Company books in so close together, at least that my brain mixes them up a little bit. So let me just double check. Dreams of Steel. This is the one. Oh, yes. So this is the one where in the review I wrote that the only reason Dreams of Steel is not getting a full 5 stars is because I'm pretty sure Glenn Cook watched Temple of Doom on repeat as he was writing this novel. If you know, you know. Or as I like to say, a yuck yuck. So, yeah. It's still great. It is still wonderful. It is from a... Yeah, Dreams of Steel is great. It's still wonderful. You get a different perspective, and I will just leave it at that it was a great perspective. So I would say it is a new favorite behind the Pearl. Then I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Buddy read this with Yolanda? Or did I dust her? Or I read it after her? We read it around the same time. I can't remember. My memory is notoriously shot. But this is a very, very short novel translated from translated into English, and it's very, I don't want to say cozy, but it is very cathartic in a not infuriating way. It is the story of a woman, a convenience store woman, who is happy being a convenience store woman. And it is everyone around her telling her that she needs to be a career woman. She can't just work in a convenience store forever. And she's just like, screw it, basically. She loves her job. She loves what she does. And it's also an exploration and depiction of a woman who doesn't know how to connect with people in a traditional sense or a normal sense. And I felt so seen by her and through her, and I empathized with her. And yeah, I really loved it. I would say that I'm very glad I read it. I really, really want to get to Earthlings sooner rather than later, hopefully by the end of the year. That's my hope. It's another short novel, so hopefully I can get to it by the end of the year. But Yolanda, if you're watching this, no pressure. If you haven't already read that, if you want to read Earthlings. And then after that, I read another Glenn Cook book. Yeah, I don't know why that always makes me Google cookbook. Anyways, Bleak Seasons. This, a lot of people apparently say Bleak Seasons is their least favorite. And by a lot of people, I mean Alan. Bleak Seasons is amazing, okay? It is the best. Yeah, the best Black Company book so far. Don't at me, don't yell at me, but Bleak Seasons is great. It's another change in perspective and narrative voice. And Glenn Cook proves with Dreams of Steel and with Bleak Seasons that he's able to capture such distinctive character voice through the narrative as they're telling their stories. And because it's all in first person. And it's just it's so good. And I just love, spoiler alert, Mergen. Mergen is the analyst in this one. And I love how he views the world. I love how he describes the world and describes people. And the story itself that's being told is just really, really, really cool. I love the narrative structure of it all and just everything that was going on. And it is safe to say that Bleak Seasons blew my mind. So Thank you, Glenn Cook. The next book that I read was Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. Again, I'll refer to the link down below of the John Steinbeck chat that I did with Carlos from StoryTube. Cannery Row is different from The Pearl and Red Pony and Men that I had read up to this point, in that it is less about a intimate story of family or an individual or individuals, but it's more of an intimate story about a town, or at least a section of town, and it's about the titular Cannery Row. And it's focusing on a lot of normally othered and marginalized people, like prostitutes and non-white Americans, and alcoholics, and of course I'm blanking, the poor who can't do anything, the homeless. And it's just really, some describe it as funny, and there are funny moments in it, but I thought it was a really wonderful story about this community of, I wouldn't even say misfits, but they are, from the outside, they are the ne'er-to-do, the lowest of low class from a societal perspective. They don't even have class. And yeah, I really liked it. I would say that it's at the end I would put at the top of glad I read it. Yeah. And then I reread Spirit Cuts Through Water. Surprise, surprise, it's great. I'm not going to rank the rereads because, yeah, that seems ridiculous. So I reread Spirit Cuts Through Water, surprise. And then I read Shards of Earth by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the first book in the Final Architecture trilogy. I did a live chat with Anitha and Pete, and I will leave a link to that down below. And this was my first Tchaikovsky sci-fi Tchaikovsky, whatever. And I'm actually, spoiler alert, I'm in the midst of Lords of Uncreation. I was not able to finish it by the end of June, so that's why it's not on here. And I really, really liked it. I loved Tchaikovsky's action-driven narrative, and I'm not normally an action-driven narrative type person, so that Tchaikovsky was able to compel me through the action. If you are barking, I'm sorry. Okay, dog, I had to handle the dog. He kept barking. But he's here with me now, so we'll see how long he lasts. But anyways, I was talking about Shards of Earth. Tchaikovsky's ability to compel me with an action-driven narrative through this found family that, again, I didn't realize that I would love that trope, but I felt so connected with the Vulture crew as a found family and individually, and it's just it's so good, and it's so compelling, and the whole story about these architects going to destroy planets, but the descriptions of it and the result are literally so beautiful. It's described as works of art, and I just loved it. So I would definitely say it didn't quite blow my mind, but it's definitely a new favorite. I would say, I would say it's at the top of new favorite. John Steinbeck fans, don't come at me, please. Anyways, the next book that I read was The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Laval. Caveat here, I've never read any H.P. Lovecraft, so this is supposed to be inspired by, leaning into, and a response to H.P. Lovecraft, maybe a specific story. That didn't impede my enjoyment of this short novel, this novella. The Ballad of Black Tom is really, I don't want to say psychedelic, but if this is a sample of the weird horror, weird fantasy aspects of storytelling that Lovecraft does, you can see how Lovecraft has inspired a lot, so much horror and so much fantasy. But you can see his influence on modern horror and not just books but films as well. And I really, really like The Ballad of Black Tom as a novella, and from Victor LaValle's writing in general as well. I want getting all of his other books. I have not yet to read any of them. So yeah, so I would say that I'm glad I read it. I'd put it below Canary Row. There you go. All right, and then I read The Gate to Women's Country by Sherry S. Tepper. I read this as part of a book club buddy read thing over on Jimmy's Patreon Discord. And I think it was Chadia that chose this one. Well, she chose 2 books, and we voted on The Gate to Women's Country. And this one, I was so surprised with how connected I felt to every aspect of this book. It was written in the late 80s, early 90s, I think. But it is a fantasy sci-fi thing, more sci-fi than fantasy. You could say the battle of the sexes, but it's not even about that. It's about a community that is mostly made up of women. The society is headed by women. And they're in this community that has a literal gate. The catalyst of the story is that the main character sends her son, her male child, to go visit the child's father, who lives outside of the women's country. And in this community and in this society, the male children are able to visit their fathers outside of the community once a year or once every 6 months or something like that. Once every period of time, for a short period of time. I think it's like a week or 2 weeks or something like that. And then they come back into women's country. And at a certain point, when they turn, I think it's 15, they decide if they are going to stay in women's country and be productive members of society, or they're going to join their fathers in I think they're called the Warriors or something like that, if I recall correctly. Again, my memory is shot. And that's really the catalyst of the story. That's the premise of this story. I was so surprised with how connected I felt to, I wouldn't even say the characters, but like there's a wonderful thematic exploration of the sexes and of gender and of power, and there's a kind of almost post-apocalyptic element to it, and I was really, really, really surprised by it, and I loved it. So I would say The Gate to Women's Country is definitely mind-blowing for me. I really, really liked it. The next book that I read was a nonfiction, and this is A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum by Emma Southon. And it is about murder and, well, murder in ancient Rome. Hi, buddy. I know you're such a good boy. I don't even know if they can see you. Okay. Max is very excited about murder. Anyways, yeah, so it's a nonfiction. It's great. I really liked it. I wound up getting Emma Southon's other nonfiction book. Well, I think she has a couple of other nonfiction books, but I got her other similarly styled nonfiction book. It's called A Rome of One's Own, and I'm very excited to get to that at some point. So, nonfiction for sure. Yeah, and then the next book that I read was the last Sarah Told book that I had to read. I should say the last fiction Sarah Told book that I had to read, and it's called Disease, and it is a collection, but not a collection. It is a story about fictitious diseases. Things like your skin turns to glass, type of thing. And it's just really, really cool. There were some stories that I was like, what does this mean? I don't get it. But I really, really liked this collection as a whole. And it's very, very short. I think it's like less than 120 pages. And yeah, so Disease is great. I love Sarah Tolmie. Sarah Tolmie is one of my favorite writers, and I cannot wait to read her poetry as well as anything else she comes out with. So I would say it is definitely a new favorite toward the end there. And then the next book that I read, I very slowly read, and that is The Iliad by Homer. I specifically read the Emily Wilson translation. I previously had tried or attempted to read the Iliad through Robert Fagel's translation, and he's just so poetic. Like, poetic to the point that it lost me. He lost me. So I wound up switching to the Emily Wilson translation. I figured, maybe let me try her translation and see how it works for me in my brain. And it absolutely and utterly worked. As soon as I started Iliad, I started over from the beginning with Wilson's translation, and I just devoured it. I did like a book a day, essentially, and I was surprised with how modern, not just Wilson's translation was with the I was going to say the prose, but no, this is poetry. With the verbiage and the vocabulary that she uses, but also in regards to the depiction and the themes of war and gender and grief. I did not expect to read a multi-millennia old story and feel so connected to characters, to gods and their emotions, the joys, the anger, the grief, the complete desperation of these characters. And it is so it's just so good. Laura and Alan and I are supposed to do a discussion, hopefully very soon. I've been nagging at them about when we're going to do this discussion about the Iliad in general. And then we're supposed to start the Odyssey, Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, very soon, hopefully. So, yes, the Iliad for sure definitely blew my mind. I would say it's even more than Bleak Seasons. So, there you go. The next book I read was a white whale book for me. It is Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. And this book I picked up at McKay's in Knoxville when I still lived in Tennessee over 10 years ago. So probably actually like 12 years ago I picked it up. And I had a little mass market paperback. I would read a few pages. And then I would get distracted by life in the world, and then I would have to start it back over again once I finally got back to it. And I would get a little bit further every single time. And I think I got up to maybe chapter 6. And that was the last time I had tried reading it. And then I was like, you know what, dadgummit, I'm gonna read it. And so I was determined to not turn this into a white whale book again. I was gonna tackle this white whale. I've never read Moby Dick, so I don't know the references. I was gonna spear the whale. I was gonna catch the whale. I don't know. Either way, I was gonna read this dadgum book. So I powered through. The prose, Peake's prose is very, very dense in that it's very poetic imagery, but it's still yet consumable at the same time. His prose takes a lot of brain power for me. So me putting in the extra effort was well worth the payoff. Titus Grown, it's so good. It is so good. It is about the titular Titus Grown, who is the heir to Gormenghast Castle, but this first book is actually, it centers on him, but you actually don't even get Titus's perspective. Max is barking again. It's fine. The start of the novel is the birth of Titus, and it takes place over the first year of his life. So you see everything in Gormenghast Castle and all the characters that populate this castle, but that are also very few characters throughout this year, this first year of Titus's life. Hi, buddy. I know you're barking, but you need to be quiet, please. Thank you. I know, I love you. All right, so yes, Titus Grown, definitely mind-blowing for me. I would say, honestly, you could flip the Iliad and Titus Grown at this point. I love them both so much, and they both became so much a part of my personality that it's ridiculous. Anyways, yes, so the next book that I read was actually a reread, and that was Ship of Magic. I was surprised that on reread, it affected me, I don't want to say negatively, but like, I was very frustrated while reading Ship of Magic on reread. And I think it's because I didn't have the newness and the lack of foresight of not knowing what was going to happen on, obviously, the initial read, that I was just so compelled by the action and the plot itself that now on reread, I'm able to kind of sit with everyone a lot deeper and a lot closer, and you see the context of the whole series, not just the whole of Live Ship Traders. So you experience these characters in a different way, slightly different way, I think, at least for me. And I was just so frustrated by a lot of everything in this book, in a good way. And because I think that was purposeful for Robin Hobb, is to make these very unlikable characters. There are no likable characters in really any of Live Ship, other than Paragon, and even he's a little bit like he's Paragon. So, and it just took me a really long time to get Ship of Magic, and I did that. I did not immediately pick up Mad Ship for my reread. I think hopefully maybe tells you something about like how I needed to take a break, take a breather to prepare myself for Mad Ship. So yeah, but this was a reread. It was still great, still 5 stars. It was just a different reading experience for me. And something that I really love about Robin Hobb's writing is that it is so complex. The characters in the story, that you can experience these stories differently and anew on reread, whether it's your first reread or third reread or something like that. It's just the depth of her storytelling is really indicative, or I should say, that you can experience these stories in different ways really is telling of the depth of her storytelling. All right, the next book that I read was the second book in the Final Architecture trilogy, and that is Eyes of the Void. And I guess I'm a second book in a trilogy, middle book girl now, because I absolutely loved Eyes of the Void. The aspects of Shards of Earth that I really, really loved, which is the Architects and Unspace, and the Void and the Presence, was the focus of Eyes of the Void. And I was so happy that that was the focus. Well, one of the focuses. And Tchaikovsky, again, continues to explore these characters and this found family and through this action-driven narrative. And it was so compelling. And added on top of that, the focus on the presence and the void and unspace. And it's just, I loved it so much. So it was definitely a mind-blowing book for me. I would say, Yes, right there. Between Bleak Seasons and The Gate to Women's Country. The next book that I read was the next and last Glenn Cook book that I have read so far this year, which is She is the Darkness. I can't really say much about this book without spoiling it. I will just say that I really liked it. And I am nervous but excited to continue with Water Sleeps. I will say, even though I think I rated this 5 stars. I'm going to rate it like 4.5 or something. But it is on the cusp of a new favorite. So, no, actually, no. I would put it here. Yeah, there you go. Favorite. There we go. All right, and then the next book that I read was another Jimmy Kingsguard Patreon book club pick, and that is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I started to combine his name. Sequoia Nagamatsu. And this is technically a novel, but I read it more like a collection. And because that's really what it is. It's interconnected stories in this world. And there is there are very intimately connected characters that go from one story to the next, and there's a through line and a overarching plot or background world plot, whatever you want to call it, to this novel. But me having read it more as a short story collection, kind of taking each chapter / story on its own accord and then reading the next one rather than reading it as one continuous narrative, I think that really helped me and my enjoyment of it. So it's definitely not a all-time favorite or anything like that, but I'm really, really glad I read it. I am interested to see what Nagamatsu will come out with in the future. So I would say it is... yeah, I would say it's here. And then I read The Passing of the Dragon, a short story by Kin Liu, and it is about art and artistry and the consumption of art and the meaning of art and the creation of art. And it's just a lovely short story, very poignant, very thematically deep and touching. And I think you guys should read it, especially like Kin Liu. So I would say definitely glad I read it. Yeah. All right. And then I got back into Discworld after 5 years of being away because I stupidly was like, oh, I'm going to do publication order. And I read Color of Magic in 2019, 2018, whenever that was time. And I was like, this is fine. Color of Magic is fine. I don't understand what everyone talks about Terry Pratchett for. And then I was like, okay, I'll start Equal Rights because that's the one that's most compelling. And I loved it. I wound up reading this in 2 sittings. First sitting was on the 2.5-hour plane ride to Florida, and the second sitting was on the 2.5-hour plane ride back from Florida. So this kept me from having a full-blown anxiety attack on a plane ride because I hate flying. And it was exactly what I needed to not just distract me, but also compel me. And Terry Pratchett's thematic explorations of gender roles and identity and purpose is just so wonderful, and he has great humor. And also, reading Equal Rights was great because he makes a reference to Gormenghast Castle, and it was, as soon as I read that line, I was like, I know that reference, and it got me stupid excited. So I would definitely say it is a new favorite. Where would I want to put it, though? I would say... again, that's another situation of, like, these could be interchanged. Shards of Earth and Equal Rights could be interchanged, but it's definitely a new favorite for sure. And then I started my contemporary romance / Emily Henry kick. I had read Beach Read 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it came out, I suppose, or soon after. And I was like, this is fine. Apparently the UK edition ending is different from the US edition, and I wish I had read the UK edition, because I think if I had not read the US edition ending of Beach Read, I would have been on my Emily Henry kick much sooner. But I wound up reading Happy Place because Laura and Yolanda, Laura from Fantasy Awash and Yolanda from StoryTube, were doing a chat about Funny Story and Beach Read. That's what it was. Yeah, it was Funny Story and Beach Read. So I was like, oh, I'll, chime in. I really have no interest in reading more, reading Funny Story, whatever. And then the way they did that they talked about Funny Story, I'm like, oh, damn, I'm going to have to read it now, aren't I? So I wound up, long story short, I wound up reading Happy Place first instead. And I'm so glad I did, because Happy Place is the book that made me realize that the Jane Austen level of romance can be achieved again. And Emily Henry does that. Emily Henry, yes, there is the romance. Yes, there is slightly spicy stuff. But her focus is on the characters and the character dynamics and the themes and the explorations of themes through these characters. And I loved Happy Place so much. Spoiler alert, as of right now, it is my book of the year. And I absolutely and utterly adore this book so much, to the point that it triggered and launched me into an Emily Henry kick. And I wound up reading Funny Story. And I also loved this one. It was great. I would say it is definitely a new favorite. And then People We Meet on Vacation, it was fine. Like, they're not all gonna be bangers. And Friends to Lovers, which is what this People We Meet on Vacations trope is, Friends to Lovers can work, but I just was not compelled by either of the love interests individually, and I did not believe them together. The female lead was infuriating. She treated the male lead like crap all the time, and I did not understand why they were friends, let alone had interest in each other. Because, so infuriating. Anyways, but Funny Stories trope is fake dating, where the main characters, both of their significant others, leave them for each other. So, yeah. So the main character, the main female lead, her ex-fiance now left her before their wedding for his childhood best friend, who left her now ex-boyfriend, and now the ex-boyfriend, or the boyfriend, the male lead, Miles and Daphne, they are roommates now because she needed a place to stay. And it winds up fake dating, and it's just so sweet and cute and great. But yeah, People We Meet on Vacation did not work for me. So the next one was the last Emily Henry that I needed to read, and that was Book Lovers. And I love this book. It's so great. It is marketed as enemies to lovers, but it's more like slightly contentious work acquaintances and then lovers, and it's just so great. I love how Emily Henry takes tropes and she leans into them while also playing with them a little bit without like outwardly and overtly subverting them, if that makes sense. I don't know. Emily Henry is great. I will read anything she writes, and I'm so excited with whatever she comes out with. And then the next book that I read was a nonfiction. It is the Plane in the Dark by Toni Morrison, and she's talking about whiteness and the literary imagination. So she's talking about American literature specifically, and how the impact of what'd she call it? She had a specific phrase that she used. Afro literature, African literature, as opposed to African American literature. She was just talking about how, regardless of whether it's on the page or off the page, American writers are writing with Black people in mind in their stories. She's writing about how American literature is really an integral part of American literature, if not the basis of American literature, is American writers' responses to Black people in America, and how it's so foundational to America as a country. It subsequently has to be and is a foundation to American literature. So whether the writer is overtly talking about the impact of Black people in the story in America, things like, I don't know, an obvious thing of like Uncle Tom's Cabin or something like that, or the unconscious depiction of Black people in literature. She references some specific American literature, things like an Edgar Allan Poe story, a Ernest Hemingway novel, and there was another thing that of course I can't remember. So I have not read any of those works that she's referencing, but I was very much engaged with her essays. Essentially, they were 3 essays that she made from essentially lectures that she previously had when she was teaching. So yes, I would definitely recommend it. So if you are into literary theory or criticism, or just like Toni Morrison's writing, I would definitely recommend that. So, and then the next book that I read was the second book in the Gormenghast trilogy, which is called Gormenghast. And I guess this was the second instance where the second book was my favorite, at least so far. And I really, 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 really liked Gormenghast. I would say, okay, I know I just said that Iliad and Titus Grown could be like interchanged, but that's only because like I'm weird. Like if the book is the first book in a series and it started off like an obsession, I will like reference the first book, like Realm of the Elderlings. I'll just say that Assassin's Apprentice is my favorite book. But really, my favorite book in the Realm of the Elderlings is Assassin's Fate. So Gormenghast is my favorite of the trilogy so far, but I would definitely say Titus Grown should be would be listed as whatever. Anyways, whatever. Yeah, so I can't really say much about Gormenghast without spoiling Titus Grown, but it continues to follow Gormenghast Castle and Titus Grown. So, and then the next book that I read was The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Again, I will refer to the discussion I had with Carlos about all of the John Steinbeck that we read this year, or so far at least. And it was, The Grapes of Wrath was wonderful. The conversation with Carlos was wonderful. And The Grapes of Wrath is my Don Quixote of this year, where Don Quixote last year became my obsession, part of my personality as a classic. Grapes of Wrath is my classic that has just taken over my identity. One could argue that the Iliad should be that, but the Iliad is a different tier of classic, I feel like. So, plus it's poetry. Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. I buddy read this with Matt from Matt on Books, after Kev from Kevin Jenkins and Colton from various Discords harped and hammered away at me to read Boy's Life. And I finally read it, and it is a coming-of-age novel, very episodic, and it is so beautiful and wonderful. I will leave a link down below to the discussion that I did with Matt just over the weekend, since I'm filming this on July 1st. And you can get my thoughts there. It was fantastic and wonderful and great. I cannot wait to read more Robert McCammon. I'm actually already planning to read Swan in September. So we will see. I will say that Boy's Life is here. There you go. There. All right, and then the next book that I read was Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn. It's the first book in the original Throne trilogy. And this was fine. It was fine. So this is an example of difference of action-driven narrative. So where Tchaikovsky has an action-driven narrative, but he has compelling characters and themes. I really have no investment in Star Wars, to be honest. And I don't really know all about the lore, and I don't really care about the lore. And so why did I even start this trilogy? I don't know. Actually, I do know. I got excited, and I wanted to join in a buddy read, and so I inserted myself into a buddy read. But on the bright side, I would like to continue the trilogy. I am listening to it on audio, and just to see where it goes, because really anything is better than the sequel trilogy. So I will put this at the end of... Actually, I will put it above People We Meet on Vacation, because at least I was compelled by the action, and I was not overly frustrated by the characters. Next book that I read was Mort, my next Discworld book. And I figured I was trying to decide if I would continue with the Witches books, or if I wanted to start and kind of continue through the publication order after Equal Rights, since Mort was next. So I decided, let's just do Mort. And I absolutely adored Mort. In case you didn't know, Death Incarnate things for me are like the greatest buzzword on the planet. And even though Death does not play a big role, like he's not the point of view perspective in Mort, it is Mortimer. And I love Mortimer. I love Mort so much. And Mort as a novel is so wonderful and great. I am planning a discussion with Derry and Kim and Alan as soon as I finish Guards, which is actually going to be my next Discworld book. And we're going to just discuss the first of the Witches and the Death and the City Watch books. And I'm so excited to read more Pratchett, because again, everyone talks about, oh, he's so funny, and so I had assumed that, oh, it's just going to be just a bunch of jokes one after the other. But Terry Pratchett really explores themes in such a wonderful, sweet way, and he's really, really funny. He's very witty. Witty in his humor, witty in his storytelling, witty in his intellect, and I loved it. And what else can I say? It's just so good. So I will say that Mort is definitely mind-blowing for me. I would put it Yeah, I'd put it there. Behind Bleak Seasons and before Eyes of the Void. So I just love Mort so much, and also Binky. I love Binky. So, Derry, I'm still so mad you didn't tell me about Binky until after I started. So it's fine. Anyways, the next book that I read was my most disappointing book so far this year, which was Private Rights by Julia Armfield. This is her latest release, and I loved Salt Slow, her collection, and I loved Our Wives Under the Sea, but Private Rights was just, I feel like it was not even a rough draft. I felt like it was a workshop, and it just felt so unfinished and undercooked. And in my review, my written review, I made some sort of stupid analogy to a attempt at baking a cake, and it's a stupid analogy, I admit, but it was not good. Private Rights was not good. Yeah, it makes me so sad, but I will try something else by Julia Armfield because of what she established with me in Salt Slow and Our Wives Under the Sea. This one just did not work for me. And especially the ending. Oh my god, the ending was just so stupid. Anyways, and then very quickly, I reread the Paper Menagerie collection. I reread that very slowly over the course of like a month and a half, 2 months. I reread it with Kyle from Read by Kyle and Bookborn, and then I reread it with Joanna as well, who is the only person of our little buddy read group that was reading it for the first time. And obviously, I loved it. I'm very glad that the stories hold up from on reread because they are still emotional and still wonderful. And yeah, that is my reading. Can I make this smaller again? Oh god. I think I did this last time. I messed this up. Hold on. There we go. All right, you guys are getting ads and stuff. But yeah, so that's my first 6 months of the year. Nothing that I'm conflicted about, which I guess could be a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. But for the couple of duds, I read a lot of really great stuff this year, and I'm very, very happy about that. So I will see you in 6 months. Godspeed.